Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Welcome to this month's Intentional Success webinar. We're going to talk about strategy for people who would rather be doing, well, anything else. More specifically, we're going to talk about what you can do to make strategy an important part of what is otherwise a very tactical life. We love our tactics in our industry. There's no doubt about it. Can't blame anybody for that. But we do have to think strategically from time to time and not conflate the difference between strategy and tactics. So we'll talk about that. I am, as always, Tom Stimson. I'm president of the Stimson Group. I'm a consultant for the audiovisual industry. I focus primarily on the live events world, which looking at the attendee list, I know most of you are from that space. You can apply this to just about any business that you have, but I'm going to try and speak your language as much as I can because it's also my language, it's my background. I got 35 years in this industry, so I understand what's going on probably as well as anybody does. Quick shout out to our sponsors. These are our 2018 sponsors for AV Matters and the Jumpstart workshops. They help make all of this possible. We are signing on 2019 sponsors and re-upping many of these folks. So we look forward to adding to this list and helping you connect with them and figure out how these people can help you with your business. So the question is, why this webinar? And I try to answer this question at the beginning of every webinar. Why did I choose this webinar? What is this subject matter about? And here's the problem. The problem is the strategy is simply a misunderstood concept. We use the word strategy in a lot of different places, and because we use the word all the time, we think that we have a business strategy, and they're actually not necessarily the same thing. So strategy is important because every successful company has a strategy. Now, you also have unsuccessful companies with a strategy, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But you have to have a strategy if you're going to be successful. You don't need a strategy to be unsuccessful, but having a strategy doesn't necessarily make you successful. And strategic planning is effective after strategic thinking. So we have to think strategically before we can have effective strategic planning, before we put together any kind of a formula that's going to lead to ongoing or improved success in our organization. I like to say that strategy is important because without it, your questions don't matter. Sometimes, and anybody who works with me knows I have this response. If you ask me a question that doesn't have an answer, I'll describe it as a how long is a piece of string question. You can't ask me how long is a piece of string. You can show me a string and ask me to measure it, but I don't know how long the string is. And that's what strategy is in business. If we don't have a strategy, we have a how long is a piece of string strategy. And what strategy is, if you're looking for a definition, and who isn't, strategy is engineering what we want to happen based on what we think will happen. And there's two important elements on here. One, we have to have a place that we want to go, but how we choose to go will be colored by what we think we're going to encounter along the way. So what do you want to leverage? What do you want to avoid? And what do you want to end up with when you're done? That's what strategy is all about. So we're trying to avoid something, we're trying to leverage something, we're trying to get somewhere. Pretty much like getting into traffic every morning on the way to work. You want to avoid the traffic, you want to get somewhere, and you want to use your accelerator every once in a while. So I'm going to talk about a failed strategy. This is personal experience, so this is real. Many years ago, when I worked with my former employer, we were bought. The owners made at the time, a very wise decision to take advantage of the opportunity to sell the business and get us into a larger group. We were surprised when we got there that it wasn't exactly what we were expecting, and this is 20 years ago. This is more than old news. But I want to talk a little bit about that company because it's a prime example of a failed strategy. And since all the people involved are now dead, it's not going to affect anybody who's currently trying to accomplish anything. So years ago, our company was bought as part of a roll-up. And for those of you who remember the 90s was, we called it the go-go 90s. There was lots of mergers and acquisitions. And the strategy in M&A back then was to build a company that was big enough to go public and then reap the rewards of selling your shares when it went public and then going on and doing the next thing. So it was a build and flip philosophy using the public stock markets as your exit strategy. And this was one of those companies, and it was very late in the game. And they weren't very good at it, because what they did was they got a couple of companies who happened to work on one or two large events, what we would call festival style events. And the investors said, well, here's some synergy. If there are probably other events these companies could work together on, so why don't we build an organization around that and see if we can't leverage the whole vertical supplier chain on a large event. All the companies that work on large events should maybe be owned by one company and therefore have some impact on everybody's bottom line. And so they put those two companies together. One of them was a party rental event company, tables, chairs, and tents, and the other one was a live event, audio, video, lighting, really audio and lighting company. And they put them together in their marketplace. And then they went out to find some more companies, and what they found were some small companies in other places, not in the same geographic area, but they had, similar party rental profiles, and they added them to the group. And then they added another company out on the far West Coast, way far away, which was also party rental, but a very different type of business, not a festival company. They added a couple of companies in my town, Dallas, a party rental company and a production company. Again, high-end corporate events, not the kind of events that the rest of the business did. So they put all these people together. And the idea was that they would continue adding these companies and leverage the synergies between them. And it all sounds great on paper until we look at the reality of it. So the strategic goals on the intent side on the left of this business, and then the reality on the right side. The intent was that they're going to create value through mergers and acquisitions. They were going to build a bunch of companies together. Everybody held a little bit of shares. I still have some pieces of paper that say, here are the shares that I owned in that company. And they're going to create value so that later on they would find a buyer and we would all get to reap the rewards of that. They targeted large events that have multiple vendors. So what they were looking for are the common thread of these large events, high profile events, which is generally the death knell of anybody's business plan. But what they found instead was that these large events actually weren't the core business of the company. And the companies that they were putting together, with a few exceptions, were unprofitable. The founding companies, the beginning companies, were not strong companies. So they had an unprofitable base. Their core business was basically a price-driven profile, festivals, things like that, fairs. They thought they were getting similar customers, but what they found was while the customers might be similar, they weren't the same buyers. So the end customer, there may have been a corporation or a foundation that was involved, but the people making the decisions weren't the same throughout all the organizations that they were buying. So the company A was selling to a different buyer than company B. They thought they would share the management and inventory resources, which is good. You want to build synergies. You can reduce the cost of things like payroll and human resources and management. However, they didn't have any intellectual or seasonal synergy between these companies. They tried to build management team out of the organizations that they had, and they tried to leverage the resources across the seasons, thinking that some people would have a slow season and they could use their inventory other places. And in fact, all of these companies had the same season. And they all had the same lack of management skill for bringing a strategy together. They also intended to share the knowledge and elevate each other, which is good. You buy a company and they're good at something, you should be able to share that with the other organizations. But what they found out is that what works for one company simply was not going to work for another. because we had all built our intellect and our processes and our resources and our training for the way that we did business for our individual strategies. So all in all, this was a very failed proposition. The intents were very good, but the realities weren't there. What they were trying to engineer something that they wanted to happen based on what they will think will happen, but what they thought would happen was flawed. It was incorrect. So going back, it's real easy to go look backwards and say, hey, why did this fail? Well, the fundamental reasons are they were thinking tactically, not strategically. The application of their intent was mostly tactical. They were looking for opportunities for 1 + 1 = 3 by saying, hey, if I've got 2 warehouses, that would be more resources than having 1 warehouse. So therefore, we are a bigger company. In fact, not realizing some of the challenges that come with that, and that you can't just ship stuff across the country overnight. They picked similar businesses, but those businesses had vastly different approaches. They had different clientele, they had different levels of sophistication, and it's very hard to get those things to mesh together. So they didn't understand enough about the companies that they were buying. They weren't choosing companies that were going to forward their strategic intent the way that they thought it would. They certainly underestimated the issues with geography and the fact that, you know, a company on the West Coast and a company on the East Coast don't have a whole lot of synergy. They didn't understand the capital needs. They were trying to conserve capital in order to make the company look more valuable, which was a common M&A mistake in the 90s. They were trying to leverage this calendar thing, which they had failed to do their due diligence and find out that there really was no calendar synergy. And then finally, they overestimated what they knew about running a consolidated business. And I think that's the thing that hurt the most. And to be quite honest with you, the reason I'm standing here today is that last bullet point. When I saw these people with all this money and all this resources going out and making these really bad decisions and nobody questioning them because they had an MBA after their name, it drove me back to school. And I went back to school and I got my MBA. I said, you know what? I'm at least as smart as these guys. You know, let me go finish my education. Maybe people will take me seriously and we won't be in this situation again. So this whole thing, strategy, is really why I'm here today. Now, having said that, let's talk about my version of strategy. Intentional Success is my brand name. If you're on my newsletter list, you get Intentional Success newsletter every Monday morning. I hope it's valuable to you. In that theme, here's what I think a strategy has to answer. It has to say, any strategy, any well-defined, well-thought-out strategy has to be able to explain why we do what we do. We have to explain who do we want to care about it, and that's not just customers, that's also suppliers, it's also employees, it's also financial investors. Okay? That's who we want to care about it. Now, why should they care about it? That's the other question we have to answer. And then if they care about it, what do we want them to do about it? What is their role now that we've connected with them? And then if I'm speaking to my employees or my partners, I'm looking at them saying, what can you do to help? Intentional Success strategy will tell you what you can do to help make this successful. And then the final thing, and I don't want to underplay this by making it last, the final thing any successful strategy is going to do for us is tell us when we will say no. I had a discussion with somebody the other day asking about, you know, putting a strategy in his organization that was, we will always say yes, and that was going to be the strategy. And it's a lovely thought. The intent of the activity was sound. However, a successful strategy has more powerful no's than it does yeses. We need to know what it is we're not going to do so that we know how to stay on track and follow the plan. So the rest of this webinar, I want to talk a little bit about the strategy definition process and how do we go about defining a strategy simply without going through one of the most painful experiences, which is a strategic planning exercise with well, good, God forbid, a consultant taking you through strategic planning and going through this whole exercise of stuff. And I don't want to completely discount the value of that, because there's valuable thinking that goes on in that process. As a matter of fact, when I do it, I call it a strategic thinking exercise rather than strategic planning, because you don't plan anything in an offsite meeting. All you do is controlled thinking. So a strategic definition process that you can take on now, you can take on right after this webinar is over and start working on it. Because I'm going to give you a very simple framework and some lines that are they already exist in your organization. You may not have noticed that they're there, but they're there. You already have some things that you want to focus on. Okay? You already have a business strategy that will probably win, but you may not have narrowed it down to just that. And then the fun part is we get to pick tactics that make all of that work better. So the first thing we do is choose an enterprise strategy. An enterprise strategy is at the highest levels of the organization, or if you're contrarian, you're going to say at the base of the organization, it's the bottom of your pyramid. Everything builds off of that. What an enterprise strategy is, how are you going to do business? What business are you in? How do you make money? And this isn't about, well, we sell widgets. This is about how selling widgets makes you money. And it's simple. I'm going to there's only 3 answers, and I'm going to give them to you, and you apply the one that makes the most sense for your business. Now, thankfully, because I went to grad school, I learned about Michael Porter, who's the guru of business advice. And he has had an untested or unchallenged theory. Nobody's ever been able to come up with anything better of the generic strategies. And so there's 3 generic business strategies or enterprise strategies. Strategy number 1 is cost leadership. A cost leadership strategy says, I'm going to create better profit by lowering my costs. If I can keep my costs down, I can make money. And then building a business on top of that low cost model is basically my business strategy. Okay. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is a differentiation strategy, is by creating a brand or product or service that is perceived to be unique. And in fact, it may actually be unique. So your costs are still important, but that's not where you're going to put all your strategic energy. You're going to put all your strategic energy into the differentiation of your business. And moving into areas that are undifferentiated would undermine that, so it gives you some guidance and direction. And the third type of enterprise strategy is focus. It's concentrating on a limited part of the market. Sometimes we'll call this a niche strategy. This is what I do, if anybody's wondering. You are my niche. You're a very specific group of people. I'm not really interested in people outside of that niche. I have a focus strategy. I focus on a limited part of the market. And I do things and I teach things that a broader market might be interested in. But I want to have a conversation with you on your terms. So I have a focus strategy. Now, most of you think you're a little bit of all of these. You think you're focused on a specific market. You think you're great at something for a certain type of customer. You think you're unique and differentiated. And of course, you focus on cost because, well, who wouldn't? And while it is true that all of these things matter, and even though you choose one, you're not going to ignore the other 2. In terms of the business, how does the business make money? We don't want to cross these streams. You can't do all 3. You can't even do 2 of them. You have a fundamental, and I'll go over a couple of them with you. You have a fundamental way of doing business that you can't deny and you can't violate, because when you do, really stupid things happen. So going back to my roll-up example, a company that's rolling up and you're trying to create synergy, which is a cost strategy, that's a cost control strategy. I want to differentiate myself by reducing the cost of doing business, not so that I can pass that savings on to my customer, per se. It's so that I can make more money, which will allow me to do more things for my customer, allow me to grow market, allow me to buy new equipment, take on new avenues, be more valuable to my identified marketplace. The business strategy has to be cost leadership in that model. And for most of you, if you're an equipment-based company, if you buy and own rental inventory or inventory that you use on events, whether you call it a rental or not, okay, you're a cost basis company. Your differentiation is actually cost. So cost leadership is probably what your business model is built on. Now, that doesn't apply to 100% of you, but it probably applies to most of you. Now, knowing that I've picked an enterprise strategy, or I've identified what my enterprise strategy is, okay, to continue the definition of my business strategy, I need to identify what forces I'm trying to counteract. Now, again, Michael Porter helps us here. So if I know what strategy my enterprise strategy is, and I look around me and I see what's going on, and I see what my challenges and opportunities are, and this is typically where somebody would insert a SWOT analysis that was going to eat up a half a day of your 2-day offsite strategy session. Okay? And by the way, I don't believe in SWOT analyses. They have little value to strategy. They have more of an internal dialogue, and you should be having it every day, not every 3 or 5 years. Look around you and what's going on. What are you trying to deal with? What's the most important external force facing you? And Porter helps us out here as well, because he's identified the 5 typical external forces that we all face. And you may face all of these to some degree, but primarily there's going to be 1 or 2 that define how you do business, how you're going to succeed in your marketplace. So if competitive rivalry is the external force you're dealing with, probably that means you're dealing with, there are too many people that do what you do, the products are somehow commoditized, the buyers typically have low loyalty. If you think that describes the challenges of doing business in your space, that's a very important external force that you want to figure out how to counteract. Now, you might also say that there's a low barrier to entry for your business, that anyone can try and do this, but that may not be as much of a problem as the low loyalty of the competitive rivalry. Now, I will say, for most of you, there are a lot of people who compete with you. A lot of the things that products and services we offer are somewhat commoditized. Sometimes your customers have low loyalty, but that's counteractable. There are low barriers to entry, but anybody can try, but not very many people are successful. We know that our buyers have bargaining power. That's an external force we might want to counteract. If there are large players in the business, they have a lot of people vying for their business. Who doesn't want to do Walmart's big national annual event? Everybody raise your hand. Yeah, we'd love to do that. It's high profile, it's big money, it's in everybody's wheelhouse. Okay? But because of that, all the large players can compete for it, and it makes it harder for the smaller players to get in. Now, suppliers also have bargaining power. If you're the victim of your suppliers, or you're having to kowtow to your suppliers, you're a victim of this. We see this where in tight labor markets, where the labor market is affecting your ability to buy, there are alternatives to working for you that could work for somebody else. Suppliers can sell their products to somebody besides you. In other words, you don't have a lot of clout as a buyer. And then there's reasonable substitutes. There's lots of close enough options. If the world out there doesn't see much difference between, hiring a corporate event company to do their show versus an entertainment production company versus a festival company versus some guy who's got some gear in the back of his van, if those all look close enough to the same, they're all reasonable substitutes. That's a challenge we have to overcome. So here are 5 external forces, any one of which could apply to you, any 2 or 3 of which might apply to you. Okay? We need to know what's the most effective thing that you can counteract. Where can you have the most impact? Okay. Now, we've identified an enterprise strategy. We know what external force, 1 or 2 of them, that we really want to counteract. Now we can start looking at what's a business strategy that will win. So enterprise strategy, external force, business strategy. Now, business strategy is where we get hung up because this requires creative thinking. And this is where most these, when I've done strategic thinking sessions, this is where the team starts to turn into the spinning beach ball on the screen and not getting anywhere. So a methodology that I've adopted, and I'll share with you right now, is here's a way to get past this vague concept of strategy. And I'm going to call it leveraging superpower. So the question I ask the team, I'll ask you is, what's your superpower? If I understand what your superpower is, then we're going to get to a strategy that will work for you much more quickly. Because if we're going to leverage our superpower, we're going to have a much better chance of being successful. So your superpower, it's that skill, it's the quality, it's the resource or process or expertise that your competitors find hard to duplicate and customers struggle to find. Competitors find hard to duplicate and customers struggle to find. Now, many of you have things that are hard to duplicate, but customers don't have any trouble finding it, so that's not super valuable. Okay. And customers are looking for something, but you can't seem to find a different way of doing it. So it's not really a superpower, but if you can get that combination of two things, that's probably it. And I've written about this a number of times over the years about finding that superpower, your internal genius. Sometimes as a person, a lot of companies, particularly in a beta company or a 1.0 company that's a startup or a first iteration of a business, they're typically built around an individual expertise or some other kind of superpower, a process, a piece of software, a knowledge base, a contract that locks you into a piece of business. These are superpowers. Now, here are some of the things that I find that we commonly discover in the AV industry are superpowers like expertise, a low-cost superpower, mastering geography, a marketing superpower, customer experience, training, process, attention to detail. I've got examples pretty much for all of these. Channel disruption. The company I worked for years, it was really, we did a lot with expertise, but the fact is we are really masters at low cost. And part of our expertise was figuring out how to do things cost effectively and maintaining our supply chain in our favor. There are companies that are great at marketing and branding. I've worked with a company in Australia, AV1 in Sydney, Australia, masters at branding and marketing. That is their superpower. They're leveraging that extremely well. Channel disruption. I think the best example of channel disruption in North America has been LMG. I have to admire what they've done over the years. Every time they move into a new piece of business, they're disrupting a channel. And I watched that company grow from, video rentals to doing full service shows, adding venues, adding integration, adding concert touring. And every time they took on a new piece of business, they disrupted that channel. They made everybody else have to start working differently. Great example of that. So we have some good examples of brilliant strategic thinking in our business. I work with a company in Tennessee who has an attention to detail that makes them an incredible value to their customers, very important for their customers in terms of how they do touring. Their concert touring approach is very detail oriented. It brings a lot of security to their business. Swank AV, who of course got absorbed by PSAV, was fantastic at training. Great training programs. That was their hallmark. So we've seen a lot of good examples of successful strategies by leveraging superpowers in our industry. Now that I've done 3 steps, I get to do the fun stuff, which is define tactics that support the strategy. And we all love talking tactics. Those are the things that we get hung up on when we're having meetings. We're trying to think strategically as we're really thinking tactically. So let's talk about what tactics are. So tactics are the things that we do that support objectives within the lines defined by your business strategy which is within the lines defined by your enterprise strategy. Okay? Tactics will counteract the key forces by leveraging your superpower. So if we know what our superpower is or what superpower we need to develop, okay, our tactics are going to help leverage that to counteract the forces that we're trying to overcome, whatever they might be. And the test for tactics is you look at the tactic, you consider its repercussions, and does it make your enterprise strategy look smarter? Good tactics will make your strategy, any strategy, look smarter. So tactics are really a lot more fun when they support your strategy, when they connect, when they all seem to work together. It's very frustrating. We've all been in meetings where people are throwing out ideas and somebody goes, man, that sounds like a great idea. But in the back of your head, you're going, but it doesn't connect. That's not who we are. That's just another thing that's going to pull away resources and attention from the real problem. You know, it sounds like a great idea, but it's not an idea that we should put our weight behind because we have more important ideas we haven't found yet. So when you find tactics that support your strategy and we have a common language about strategy, then it's a lot more fun to brainstorm and come up with these ideas. And we don't feel so bad when we leave a good idea on the table because it's not a good idea for the strategy that we've chosen. So I'm going to give you some examples in all of this. This is a great time to pull out your phone and take a screenshot or take a screenshot with your device. I've got the 4 columns here for the enterprise strategy, the external force you're trying to counteract, and the business strategy. And these are just 4 fairly generic examples. And then, of course, the tactics that support these strategies. So I created one of these each for a cost leadership enterprise strategy, a differentiation, and a focus one. So a cost leadership strategy might look like focus on operational efficiency to keep costs down and improve your negotiating position. Okay. Now, the external force that I might be trying to overcome is the buyer's bargaining power. So if you have buyers that are used to dictating their price and treating the supplier like a commodity, I think in our industry we can say that the hotel venue-based contract industry has certainly reflected this. Selling into the association market has been like this. The buyers have a lot of bargaining power. So if I have a cost leadership strategy and I'm trying to counteract the buyer's bargaining power, I need a superpower. Now, your superpower may vary. In the example, the superpower I'm offering is that this particular company has a capital superpower. Okay? They're able to invest money, they're able to buy equipment, they have good financial resources. So they're going to capture the buyer's share with a broad, deep inventory. So their approach to overcoming the buyer's bargaining power is to give them more choices at a better price. And some of the tactics that they're going to use to do this are things like regional depots, shipping contracts, standardized packaging, volume purchases of new equipment, all of these things that are going to reduce their costs. Where they might fail is if they mistake regional depots for being regional offices. And this is something I've seen happen a few too many times, so I'll just call this one example out if you're thinking about doing this. The point of having regional depots isn't to reduce the cost for the customer or say, hey, we're local. The reason for having a regional depot is to reduce your internal costs. It's not something that and this is a mistake a lot of us make. I don't know how many times I've had a conversation with somebody saying, yeah, we're thinking about opening up an office in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. And I'm going, man, all the Baltimore guys are rolling their eyes right now going, really? That's all we need is another small company here. That's a saturated market. Sure, there are a lot of meetings there. But opening up an office there won't get you business. Opening up an office there is going to make you do local business at national price, at national resources. So as soon as you open an office there, you're now local. You can't charge for travel. You can't charge for trucking. And you're competing against a very entrenched local supplier group who knows the market very well and will set up their companies to be cost efficient in that marketplace. So we can think about our tactics. If we're setting up depots, that makes the business strategy of leveraging capital look smarter. That's a great way to use my money to reduce my costs. That make sense? So I won't go through the other examples because you can look at your phone and do that later. This whole idea of thinking of strategy in this way goes beyond just the overall strategy for your business. You can apply this within your business. You can apply this to just about anything. I mean, I'm weird. I actually use a strategy when I clean out my garage. I have to think about these things in order to get it done. So got a question here, and I like this question. It's a great question. Does an organization's superpower help to identify its enterprise strategy? No, and let me tell you why. Over the course of the life of your business, your enterprise strategy might evolve. It might change. But I guarantee that your superpower will change. So a superpower will affect your short-term business strategy, and short-term could be 5 or 10 years. Your enterprise strategy, whether it's cost leadership or a differentiation or focus, is not predicated on what your superpower actually is. So, matter of fact, if I go back one slide here and say I could have this cost leadership strategy, or let's go back the other way. I can take the superpower of having capital resources, and I can put it next to differentiation. And I could take any external force and marry the two, and that's going to affect what my tactics are. So the thinking always moves from left to right. So if I'm going to be in a differentiated model, and I want to battle low barrier to entry, and my superpower is capital, I'm probably going to spend a ton of money on marketing and advertising so that I can create a powerful, differentiated brand that people can't copy. So good question. So think left to right. Don't use the tactics or the resources that you have to define what the business strategy is. Define the business strategy, the business you want to be in, and apply the resources more effectively. The other danger you have is that if you start with your superpower and work backwards, if that superpower is no longer a superpower, how will you know? I got to answer. I got to give another piece to that answer. Back in the 90s, one of the superpowers that was coveted were these geniuses. Technology was changing super fast. We all wanted to have a genius on our team who could keep up with the changes in technology. They learned how to program things. They know how to get computers to talk to stuff. Every new piece of technology was an opportunity for them to figure out what else it could do, which we could turn around and leverage into businesses. Well, fast forward 20 years, a new piece of technology comes out, and a 12-year-old can figure it out. Everything's menu-driven, they're computer-driven, it's all software. The rate of change is very slow in terms of the technology. The rate of change in the software and the user interface is much faster. We can do some really cool things, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist anymore to do it. So if my superpower had been a genius, it's very difficult to have a genius now that can keep ahead of the marketplace in terms of geniusness, because everybody's a genius now. And some of the most effective technology people I see in older companies are the young people who've just come in and they don't have all the baggage of how we did it back in the broadcast studio 20 years ago. So again, don't hang on to your superpower. Figure out which of your many superpowers is the one that you want to leverage, and be willing to change it as your circumstances change and your strategy can evolve. So thank you for that question. All right, now we're going to put it all together. And this chart right now on your screen is bigger than everything I've talked about, because understanding what your enterprise strategy and your business strategy is just part of the puzzle. If you want to have a successful business, if you want to be able to have a steerable business, something that can grow and make more money in the direction that you want it to move, then you have to put together more elements to this. And in the process of communicating this to my audience, my team at my company, I've got to be able to answer all of these questions. So this takes the intentional success formula and puts it in more detailed terms, and then there's more detail behind this chart as well. I can talk about my enterprise strategy. I can talk about the value proposition of how we're going to improve our customers' condition. I can talk about what my brand promise is, which says who we're going to be along the way. I can talk about the mission. I talked about the company in Australia with a really strong brand. Their mission has nothing to do with events. Their mission is really more along the lines of save the planet. And everything they do has a charitable element to it and has a green element to it. And they weave that into everything they do. And that's part of what their brand is. So you have to have a mission. I'm not saying your mission has to be that altruistic, okay? But you do have to have a mission that goes beyond what the day-to-day tactical activities of your business is. And then you have to have vision for the company. And vision for me answers 4 questions. Why are you in business? How do you make money at it? Who are your customers? And then what are your values? If I can answer all of these questions, this is the baseline of my organization. I can change my business strategy without changing anything above it. So my business strategy is your secret sauce. It's your superpower. It's why you're going to succeed. This is the thing that we're going to leverage. This is how we're going to be better. This is why people are going to do business with us. And that's what you're trying to put together. But you have to be able to communicate all of these elements because you've got to get people behind all of this, and you don't know which thing they're going to latch onto. So I was privileged to be at a client's company meeting last week where they did effectively what's on the screen right now. They explained in the clearest terms they've ever done in the life of their organization why they're in business, how they make money at it, who their customers are, and what are the values of the organization. And they put together a little pamphlet that fits in your pocket that they could send their employees home with to pound those messages home. And they will go through a process of reinforcing these messages all along so that everyone will support their actual business strategy, which was also well defined in that meeting. So there's a lot of value in going through this exercise, but don't overthink it. Most of it's already right there in front of you. You just have to connect it in a smarter way. Now, I'm going to do, we'll have time for Q&A. I see some more questions coming in. Please think about some questions that you might ask about how you might apply this in your business. Or it's always nice to say, Tom, what the heck did you mean by that? Get those things ready. I'll be back to you in just a second. I'll make a couple more housekeeping announcements. Next month's webinar is how to ruin a great strategy quickly. So I'm going to present to you the 5 logical choices that will undermine your strategic goals plus what to do instead. And what this is really about is we do some things that seem perfectly common sense, make all the sense in the world, but they undermine our strategic goals. And how to identify those things and what to do instead. You know, the putting offices all over the country in order to gain market share is a great example of something that sounds really good on paper, but is strategically probably very unwise given the current climate of what our industry is and the fact that we're global and you're sitting in an office somewhere, anywhere in the world watching this webinar while I'm doing it from my home office. So tell me why you need a physical office anywhere other than where you are. So that's next month's webinar. Jumpstart workshops. Of course, we're going to have them again. We had a bunch of them in 2018. We had 4. We had 253 attendees over those 4, and that's individual attendees, individuals. Many of them attended more than one event. 77 different companies came to Jumpstart workshops. We had 50 companies that sent 2 or more attendees to an event. There was one company that sent 6 to one event, and they probably sent about 12 overall. 20% of all of our attendees came to 2 or more events. So, what are the events in 2019? Well, here they are, and they're on my website as well. We're going to talk about strategy. We're going to take what we learned in last year's Jumpstart Strategy Workshop and expand it with more lessons. I've got some guest people from the industry coming in to talk about the application of their strategy for their business. We will have some panel discussions with some of you who are joining the event to talk about what they've learned about strategy. Lots of Q&A. I, of course, will be presenting. I will probably have one other guest presenter. We're putting together the program right now. I'm very excited about it. If you were there last year, it's all new because that's the way we roll. We're going to take you on a little bit farther than you were last year. And we'll do the same thing for marketing, operations, and management for later on in this year. So mark those down in your calendar. Watch your emails. We'll be sure to let you know about it. Give you every opportunity to sign up. So be sure you're on the mailing list. If you personally registered for this webinar, you are on the mailing list. If you're sitting there with somebody else who drug you into the conference room and gave you cold pizza, you can go register yourself for the newsletters. Go to my website, click on download your free ebook. I'd be happy to send that to you and add you to the mailing list, and you'll get the Intentional Success newsletter. If you get Intentional Success, you're already on the mailing list. Don't worry about it. I am very easy to access. I'm very easy to get hold of. So the meeting with, ask questions. Don't hesitate to do that. You're my people. I like talking to you. I enjoy talking about business because I learn stuff. So if you want to have a conversation, learn about what I can do for you, or just ask me a question, just go to my website, schedule a free call. I'm happy to visit with you. I look forward to that. That's part of the fun, the surprise of finding out the kinds of questions that we have and seeing what we can explore to take you along the way. It's free. There's no hard sell. You know, I just like talking about this stuff. Again, let me thank our sponsors, and let's look at a couple of these questions here. And then I've got a few final thoughts before I let you get away. Question here. You mentioned going after large companies like Walmart. Is there a way for smaller AV companies to get into a large organization like that? Well, maybe. Really, you know, I'm going to turn that back into a strategic question. Why would you want to? Is that where you're going to be wildly successful? So yes, and I can tell you that, you know, and Walmart's a great example of small AV companies getting into that organization and getting hold of that piece of business. That's kind of the story of the Walmart business, for any of you that know the background. So yeah, you can do that. Who are your customers? You know, who's your buyer? And where do you find them, and how do they find out about you? So now this becomes a marketing and business development question, which would be another webinar. But yeah, it's possible. It's absolutely possible. You have to be credible. Your organization, you personally have to be credible. Your organization has to be credible. And you have to find some way to get their attention above everybody else. As whether you're a small company or a large company, they're all clamoring for that business. How are you going to do it differently? Why is your request for attention going to be more valuable to the recipient than anybody else's? So another question here, is it a benefit or detriment for us to mention small offices we have outside of our home office? Well, I don't know. That's a how long is a piece of string question, because it depends. If your business is a regional business and you serve many, many regions, and the reason you're offering up that is that this particular client has offices in other regions that you work in, yeah, it might be valuable. The question you really need to ask is, why does your company have small offices in other regions? What is the purpose of that? And it may not be a selling point. It may be a cost control point. It may be a licensing point. It may be because you have one client there who insists on you having an office, so they feel that they're taken care of. So go back to your organization and understand why you have offices there to determine whether putting them out in front in a customer conversation is actually worthwhile. So thank you for that. That's a good question. Other questions. Says, Tom, we have a, okay, here's somebody who's heard me talk before. Hey, Tom, we have a mission statement that's 87 words long and is hanging in our office. Is this, I'm trying to reword this for him. I won't reword this forward. Let me just address this. If you get 5 strategy consultants in a room and you ask for a definition of what a mission statement is, you're going to get 12 answers. There are lots of approaches to mission statements. I usually say the mission statement we have hanging in our offices were typically written for our bankers. I want a mission statement that's written for my employees. If it's written for my employees, my customers will probably identify with it. If I write a mission statement for my customers, my employees might not identify with it. So I want to say, who do I want to have the most impact on? And I think it's my employees and the type of people I'm trying to attract and retain to do the kind of business I want to do. So if you're rethinking mission statements, shorter is better. I have several clients that we have gotten them down to a 1-word mission statement. 1 word. Now, people say, tell me more. That's exactly what it should do. We can explain more about what that 1 word means, but that 1 word gives them focus. It's very succinct. And the best companies start every meeting with that 1 word, or at least identifying what their mission is, making sure that we all understand why we're in this meeting today is because we have a mission that we haven't fulfilled yet. So thank you for that. How long should it take to do a strategic planning session? Oh gosh, I hope as short a time as possible. I find if you're following the kind of formula that I put out here of having a discussion of what kind of business that you're in, if you have somebody who understands all of that, typically you can put a management team down for half a day and think through all of this. Now, you won't answer all of the questions, but you'll figure out what the questions are. And so come back at another half a day a couple weeks later, and another half a day a couple weeks later. I hate to sell out my entire consulting industry because we invented the 3-day offsite strategy meeting. And I think they're great for some camaraderie. I think it's great to get out there and get away from the office and talk about stuff. I've not seen a lot of examples where really substantive work was done. So keep trying. There's great reasons to be off site for 3 days. Talking strategy is probably not one of them. I think you can do shorter meetings, interspersed, preferably facilitated, somebody to help you understand what you're talking about and get more done. So again, thank you for that. Thank you for the chat comments, guys. I appreciate those accolades. That's very encouraging. I'm not going to read them because, well, they're just nice notes, and I just want to let you know I appreciate them. So, oh, and I have to answer the standard question. Yes, this presentation will be available online. For those of you who joined late, you'll get an email about 24 hours from now that will give you a link to the page that has this archived video available for your viewing. It'll be available for the next 30 days or so. Feel free to share that with anybody in your office. It's an open link, so you can share it with other people. I'm happy to let everybody watch it. But if you registered, you'll get the email. If you didn't personally register, then you'll have to find out who did and get the link from them. So thank you guys very, very much. I appreciate it. I hope I made strategy a little less boring, at least for today. Don't forget to register for next month's webinar and keep reading the newsletters, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.